Welcome to another episode of Culinary School Stories, the weekly podcast that is dedicated to sharing the stories of people around the globe whose lives have been influenced, impacted, touched, and or enriched, for good or for bad, from their culinary school experience. Hi, my name is Colin Roach, and I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. You are an important part of this show, where we ask the question, what's your culinary school story? So now, without any further delay, let's meet today's guest. Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening in today to another episode of the Culinary School Stories podcast, a proud member of the Food Media Network. My guest today is Alex Rubenic, and Alex, I want to start right out by saying welcome and thank you for joining us today and sharing your culinary school story.
Well, thanks, Chef, for having me. First and foremost, I really appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Great. I haven't seen you in a long time. I know we have a lot to talk about, but let's start right at the beginning. Where did you get your love of food and cooking? Where did that start? And when did you realize you wanted to go to culinary school?
I think my love of cooking probably started, when I was in the single digits. I remember making fudge with my grandmother. There's a great picture of me doing that in like fourth grade. I used to bake cookies all the time with my aunts for my grandparents and cousins with during the Christmas season, sent them out in little tins. So I think there's always been something about being in the kitchen or around food that's really been a big draw to me. And I kind of had the aha moment when I was actually kind of taking a sabbatical from ROTC when I moved down to Florida for a year to continue my education. And I was like, I just got to do this. This is the thing that's pulling me.
Awesome. And why did you pick the school that you went to? Was it just because you were in that area? Did you do any research? How many schools did you look at first? Johnson
& Wales was not my first pick. I was really, this is 2008 when I'm in heavy consideration. I knew about Culinary Institute of America, more like I've heard of it. I was looking at a local community college in Wheaton, called College of DuPage. I was looking at Robert Morris College, downtown Chicago, Le Cordon Bleu, downtown Chicago. But I was working at this place called Papa Du's Seafood Restaurant as a server. I figured if this is something I'm even moderately interested in being a cook, I probably should be aware if I can handle any facet of the industry whatsoever. So I really started in the front of house. Not very good, but had to find a way to get better really quick, and really found I loved the ebb and the flow of the industry, loved the characters, loved the people, loved the excitement. All of those butterflies are still there. But there was a corporate chef that just talked about Johnson & Wales. He graduated out of Providence, I think in like 82. And I took a chance. I sent my application in, and a couple months later, I got accepted, and I was like elated. I was like getting into an Ivy League school, kind of, because honestly, Johnson & Wales tends to be up there in what they were looking for. But for me, I picked that specific group, that university, because in that time they were really leading the way in the academic side of that degree program. It wasn't just a certificate, and that was kind of the big transition, I think, in the earlier 2000s of getting from the certificate into an actual accredited sort of academic setting where you have not just some associates, but that potential to really go for a bachelor's degree. And from there, you can go somewhere else. And I like that. I like that structure. I like that it wasn't just about I throw a cutting board. It was about knowing how much the cutting board cost and why that knife's important, and know where you're getting your product from, how much all that cost. And that really struck a real chord with me. Great. And why did you specifically pick the Miami campus? Because there was Providence, there was, I guess, Charleston or Norfolk or Denver. Yeah, Norfolk. It wasn't. I think they had closed Norfolk by the time I was looking. I thought about Providence. That was kind of a cool idea. But I mean, I was my early 20s. I was 22, 21, 20, in that area when I was thinking about it. And I mean, why wouldn't you want to go to school in Miami? It's warm. I had already spent some time in Florida, and I kind of figured I didn't mind the warm weather, and I was getting a little tired of the Chicago snow. And I know I live here now, and the irony is not lost on me at all. But what I will say the unknown positive out of going to North Miami was just the level of inclusion and how much diversity we had on our campus. I think made a lasting impact on my ability to work well within the field and the industry, as well as just have great lasting connections across the globe.
Yeah, it is one of the most diverse campus out of them all. So great there. So what was going through your mind when you first went there? Did you tour it first, or did you just show up on day one and that was ready? Move in and let's get going.
Yeah, Chef, I just showed up. Like, I showed up on moving day. It was a Saturday. I was a couple days ahead to get into the dorm because I was coming from so far away, and I had no idea what was going on. It's the first time I'd ever been really south of Tallahassee on any on any latitude whatsoever, longitude. It was crazy. I just remember driving down like, am I absolutely bonkers for just not seeing the campus, not touring the campus, not really having too many connections down there, just showing up with my bags and be like, this is it. We got to make this work. It was bonkers, but I mean, again, it's the community down there couldn't have been better. The support from all of the staff and the colleagues were just, it made you feel comfortable and at ease. And
those are the type of things you do when you're young, right? You're just impulsive and you just say, we're going to do this. It'll work out.
Yeah. You're like, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, and the one thing is you just don't know how bad it could get. You're looking at a very small tunnel of potential success. And you're like, that's all I need. I just need a little glimpse of light. Everything's going to be just fine. Yeah. It's exactly that kind of story.
So what was your first impression? Now, when you hadn't seen it before, you pull up, you show up, you park the car, you jump out. What's going through your head?
It was warm. It was muggy. It was exactly what I expected to be out of Florida. It was great. I loved it. I remember like the thickness in the air. I remember the smell of the trees and the water, because there's that little creek we had running on the back of our campus, and just struck at the building. I kind of remember really looking at the labs. It was like the entrance to a movie. You're just like in awe. You're like, I hadn't really cooked professionally or at all when I'd gotten on campus. It's really, and I know we'll touch on it, but really my first time putting any product into a pan was with Chef Wayne Bryant in nutrition. And that was horrible. I was really, really bad. Like really, really not good at that. And I couldn't make a crepe to save my life.
So I guess we'll say you weren't prepared then. So what would you have, now that you're looking back, what would you wish you had known or what you had done before you went there that would have helped you maybe make that path a little bit clearer, a little bit easier for you?
I don't think I would have changed how I approached the school. I don't think I would have changed my mindset. I think there could have been some guidance, my second or third year, and just understanding the industry, and more, I think probably when I got out of school, I think is where there could have been a little bit more, hey, maybe think about this, maybe think about that. But I think everyone who enters that classroom, really, it needs to be for them. They need to decide that this is what they want for them in culinary school. You can't really appease anyone else, really, because you're submitting yourself to the industry, to everything about the industry, and you need to make sure you're okay with that decision. That's really the reason I decided to be a server for the first couple of years, because I wanted to see if I liked any of it, all of it. I was like, all right, here we go. So I was already committed at that time. So it was just, kind of like going to high school or vocational school. It's like, this is the thing you need to be good at, create the structure, follow the programs, ask questions when they're, take detailed notes. It's all really the same principle. It's just, instead of like taking ACT tests or any of those, it's practical. You need to be really good with your hands. You need to listen really well. You need to be detailed. You need to be a really good follower, a really, really good follower. And even when think you're leading, you probably need to keep asking questions. So, I wouldn't change anything about my first 2-3 years at all on campus.
So tell us about that first lab. What's going through your mind? You get your uniform, they give you the knife kit. Well, they don't give it to you. It's actually part of your tuition. So you get all this stuff and you're supposed to figure it out, and you show up on day one. What's happening? What are the students that you're sharing the class with? What are they like? Was the chef welcoming to you? Was it made to be scary? Talk about that, would you?
My first class was beverage. I had a great instructor, Chef Jordan Houghton on campus, was amazing. But like I was giddy, but I was also like jealous. I was wearing, basically the front of house uniform we got, but I kept staring at my knife kit and I couldn't use it for basically the first 3 weeks. It was like driving me crazy. I just wanted to use my knives and I couldn't do any of that. I wanted to put my apron on. I wanted to like get in the kitchen. Like I wanted to do the things. And it was like learn about beverage. And funny enough, that sparked my real love and interest for the beverage world, which is nothing I particularly lost. It's part of it's actually my concentration for my bachelor's. And it was exciting, but I remember getting into my first lab and just being in awe of having no idea what I was doing. Like everything looked different. Right? It was like the first time I'd really been in a professional kitchen, the first time I'd been really in front of a professional range. There's a real oven. There's things were just, a little bit more sanitary, I guess. It's not your home kitchen where it's cozy. And even the home kitchens, really have evolved over time for their function. But the professional kitchen really is relatively kind of the same for the past 50, 60 years. And I was just like really flabbergasted. I was really kind of befuddled for the first couple of days, and then I really just settled into getting in there. I mean, Chef Wayne Bryan is obviously an amazing chef and sorely missed within our community, but those lessons were pivotal. I just remember having no idea. Like I was like lost, but like lost in excitement.
And was everybody in the class lost as well, or were you feeling like you were different?
No, I could tell some people were immediately comfortable. I was with some classmates who had already been professionally cooking. Their family owns a restaurant, or they've been doing this, or they've been from Pro Starts. There was like these courses from high school I didn't even know was an option in my world. And that's because I had a completely different focus in high school, my early year in college. But like when I got here, I really felt like the newest greenhorn possible. And I honestly think there was a bit of an advantage there because that deficit of knowledge and that education gap could only be overcome through just consistently trying to catch up to everybody. So you don't let off the gas, not just for the first class, but all the way to 4 years. And there just came a point where the only way I could get better was I had to work harder. So it's that work ethic that really drove me into Alex, you got to study harder. Like you really need to understand the differences between this sauce and that sauce, or what a Maillard reaction is, or why you can't have a Maillard reaction when you toast bread. And just these little details that will matter down the road. I really pushed myself really hard to get to a point where I felt somewhat competent by my second year. And even then I was like, I think I can scramble some eggs. I passed La Costra.
So if someone's listening right now and they're thinking about going to culinary school and they're like, I got no experience, I don't know if I should do this. What you're saying is that's okay. It could be an advantage.
It can be. It really can be. It's an advantage if you embrace it. If you really are clear and understanding of the position you're in, and that's the direction in your life and your career you want to take, or if you're taking it not because you want to be a cook, because you need to be, rounded knowledge-wise in the industry. There's a lot of people I know that have this bachelor's degree from our university, the food service management, and they don't really cook much anymore. It's just the complete comprehensive understanding of the fundamentals of cooking that changed their direction in their career. Yeah, absolutely. If this is the thing you want to do, this is great. There are other avenues to be a really, really good cook. There's other avenues to be a great manager in the industry. Just you have to understand where being in culinary school provides. I wouldn't say a competitive edge in the industry. I would say it provides you a competitive edge to close the gap between your peers. You're always in competition. It's just the way this world works. So it's how are you going to put yourself in the best position to be the best version of yourself, to reach the most of your potential as quickly as possible. And I think culinary school, Johnson Wales, absolutely gave me that key to my own success. But it's not for everybody, and I understand that.
Excellent advice. So you got an associate's degree, 2 years, and then you stayed on and got a bachelor's degree, 4 years. Talk about that. Could someone just survive with the 2-year degree, in your opinion, and just go on, or do they need 4 years? And if they do, why did you pick the 4-year track that you did?
I picked the 4-year track because I promised my mom I'd get a 4-year degree. So you can't really lie to your mom like that. It really will come back to haunt you. That's for sure. I remember leaving my internship. I did my internship in Germany. at a 5-star 5-diamond resort called Sonnenalp in a small little town called AFROTC, which is about 2.5 hours. So,
that's your 2-year.
Yeah, for my 2-year. And did it in the middle of winter. I was like really living in the snow globe for a minute. It was gorgeous. But, you know, there was an offer on the table for me to potentially, after I just literally finish a 3-month stint in a class and then come back and work at that property. And that's something I always kind of remember in the back of my mind, that even our associate's degree gave me an opportunity to get right into the industry. It would have absolutely been an entry-level position. Sous chef or chef de partie is not even a thought at that level. You're just a commis, and you're really just trying to learn everything. I thought about it, but I came back from my bachelor's because I had some other aspirations and I had made promises and I wanted to really follow through. And doing that opened another door, which got me to be a 2-year TA for the hospitality college. If I hadn't stayed, wouldn't have been able to have that opportunity open for me. I think maybe you'll understand more than most chefs. It's just you really don't know what doors open around the corner. And you can take a left and that's a different door. You take a right, it's a different door. It's just finding your path and being comfortable with it.
Yeah, sometimes you don't even know your path. It's right there in front of you and you just got to go on it. And as you start on the journey, you go, wow, that was a good decision.
Yeah.
Great. So the 4-year degree, you stayed on, but you didn't stay with nutrition or culinary. You kind of went into the hospitality side, more management, front of the house. Tell us about that as an option. If someone's listening and says, you know, I'm in culinary now, I'm cooking, you know, I love it, but I don't love it as a career. I'm thinking of something else in this industry. Maybe you could talk about those paths, those opportunities, those doors that open for you in that area.
Yeah, I mean, this will be an interesting start, but something the Air Force taught me is the greatest barrier to communication is no common core of experience. So if you're a front of house manager and you really don't have a fundamental understanding of food, it's going to be really hard to communicate, not just with your front of house team or the guests, which is the most important, but to work with the back of house, to have a fluid, open dialogue. You don't have to be the best cook in the kitchen. Hopefully that person's already on the payroll. But if you're interested in wine, you probably should have a general understanding of wine pairings if that's the world you're going to go into. And that even extends all the way to the non-bev world. You're not going to climb the ladder unless you have a couple things under your belt. One, you really got to be competent with food. 2, you need to be very competent with beverage. And then if you come to the other side, you just got to be aware of the overall business operations. And I think that where Johnson & Wales really in the early 2000s, you know, it's a business school first before it was a culinary school. That's every time I talk about Johnson & Wales specifically, I say it is a business school first. They added culinary later. And it's that, for me, at the top end, at the 4,000 level courses, that was the principle that I really saw ring and true, is we understood not how to cut an onion, but how to make money on the whole onion. And that, for me, was a really, really impactful lesson. I mean, I use your example every day, costing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I remember that class. I really remember that class. I remember the people I was sitting next to, and I couldn't get the cost of peanut butter per ounce down right, and I didn't understand how to, you know, remove the 2 slices of bread and factor the loss of the bread that I was losing in the overall equation. So, you know, if you've got, for example, 24 slices of bread and you take 2 away, well, now you have to cover the cost of 24 slices of bread and 22 slices, and it's just understanding all of that arithmetic makes a difference. And to get back to your question, if you don't want to cook for a living, but you're still finishing your associates, you want to go front of house, you've done the hard part. You've got the foundation of knowledge. Don't lose it. Don't stop learning. Don't don't get out of the trends or understand what's happening, but, you know, pursue your passion in the front of house. There's a lot of that. I think service needs to come back. We need to have a better understanding of just honest, genuine service. And I think there's pockets of restaurants that do a great job and they're staples, but you know, it's just like cooking. It should be a gesture. It should be the thing that you give naturally. I think the customer should pay for your education and experience, but that genuine giving to something, that's our gift. That shouldn't really, I don't charge anybody for that. Mm-hmm. I'm just paying my experience.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but how is that being affected now with COVID and this pandemic? Because, you know, they're shutting down or they're doing more takeout only. So where does that service aspect, which has disappeared in some states. And where do you see that coming back? Is it going to be needed? Is it going to be needed more than it was? Is it going to be eliminated? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. A couple thoughts. First and foremost, I think the word pivot probably hasn't been used enough, which is a little bit of a joke in these days. I think it's swim or die, right? Business wise, you can make smart business decisions, and it's not easy if you're just stuck in kind of that apprentice mode, or just the traditional sense of you're just going to do this like it's a craft, like you're a tradesman in a journey. I think the education we have, the foundation allows me to make better understanding. I can make better choices because I'm more informed, and an informed decision is always going to be better. It's really hard hitting a moving target. I think service is going to come back. This is an unfortunate situation we're all in. It's definitely worldwide, and I think it's long lasting for now, but we're going to be eating in restaurants in a year. We're going to be eating in restaurants in 9 months, hopefully 6 months. So the doom and gloom is over. It's kind of restaurants survive, and service, I think, is hopefully going to be the hallmark, because that's where, the restaurant idea is to restore the customer better than we found him. We need to nurture our customers. We need to literally provide you with nourishment. And I think there's some of that. And to the extent of like fine dining is never going to die. It'll just get smaller. Like the world's top 2 or 3% they make a lot of money. They made a lot of money this past 9 months in this 12 years. They're going to want to pay for somebody, and that's like James Beard's and up. Those restaurants will be smaller. Chicago had 21. I believe we had 21 stars in 2020. We've lost, I believe, 4. So the fine dining world is getting smaller, but it's not going to go away. The Michelin Guide's not going to go away. The Bib's not going to go away. Zagat's not going away. Like all of that's still going to be there. The guests are still going to want to be there. So yeah, dining is going to happen. And I think service is always the cornerstone to a great restaurant. You're going to always want the food and the beverage, but you'll come back because the service is so genuine, so hospitable. That's what everyone wants. You can get that at Denny's if you got a great server who cares that day, or you can get that at a Linny.
Yeah, I always say that to my boys when we're out. I'm like, see, that's a good manager. This is good training because there's good service. Doesn't that make you feel good when you're in that, whatever it is, Chick-fil-A, for example? They do something right, it seems, at least in the one around our area. The people are happy they're trained. Then you go to other ones, it's like, they could care less that you're there. And if the food is, irrelevant at that point, it really comes down to how they make you feel and that service and that, yeah, I'm happy to give you my money. I like coming here.
I think when I see that, I feel really good about, that tells me a lot about the culture and the operational philosophy that they're living their life by day in and day out, service in, service out. Their focus, their priorities, and how they're interacting with the guest is really aligned, really spot on. They already know the product they're serving is going to be consistent. They've done the work, right? But the intangible in every restaurant is the human element, that human interaction. And when you can get a great manager to communicate evenly, to be a constant guiding coach, and that as a manager, you're a coach, right? You're going to kind of wear that mom and dad hat, and you're also going to be the coach hat. And if you're ever outside of a coach mentality where you can always affect positive change, you're not being a great manager. And I think that's also something where you see a great restaurant, you feel good about the outcome because from the top down, this is a really good crew.
Yeah.
And that's always comforting. It's the thing that makes you want to come back.
Yeah. So true. So true. Let me take you back to school. You had mentioned that you thought you were prepared, or the school prepared you, at least for those first 2 years, and you had mentioned or alluded to something like, wish there was more support for those later years, 3 and 4, or even after you left. Could you expand upon that a little bit and maybe share some ways that they could have helped a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. In an overarching conversation, it's just really hard to teach someone the industry in 4 years. It's also really hard to teach someone how to start a business in 4 years. I think there could have been some courses that were primers, some general business courses, how to get a tax ID, how to work for loans, where do you start looking for any of that money. I mean, there's an idea that's a great idea. Everyone's got this dream restaurant if you're a cook for the most part. But the idea that a dream's a dream, you need to find a way to finance that thing. That thing needs to get off the ground. Those gaps are hard. And I found out of the industry, a lot of owners don't really talk about how they started. It's kind of a taboo subject about how did you open a restaurant? Where did you get the money from? Who are your partners? Yeah, those are the things that I find challenging even today to have open dialogue with anybody really about that side of the business. There's a few people who are willing to have that dialogue, but I think Johnson & Wales, essentially, specifically my specific campus and my university, gave me a fighting chance to really be a really smart entry level cook. Because there's just so much you don't know. It's like the first day of learning about wine. You're like, oh, it's like two grapes. It's just like a red and a white grape. And you're like, well, that's really funny you say that, because there's like thousands of reds. And there's a bunch that are crossbred and different names. And that we're not even talking about Italy. Italy is a whole thing. We're just going to talk about Cab and Pinot. You're like, oh, what is going on? And I think kind of, paralysis by analysis sometimes when you get overwhelmed with how much you need to learn. And what the structure of culinary school provides is that you can take meaningful chunks of that information and create a foundation that's really successful, and then keep putting building blocks. Your experiences should be the building blocks. That education is like the hard slab of the house that I'm trying to build a foundation on.
Yeah, it's a lot like boot camp. They're just getting you in there to figure out how you can hold the rifle. But then you go out to war. It's a totally different thing. And they're just trying to set the foundation. They can't teach you about how to get a loan or write a business plan, where they got to first teach you like knife cuts and how to do a tournée or something that you may need, chopping parsley.
Right. So
they start there, and you, like you said, you just don't have enough time, and you have to kind of pick and choose. And I guess that's where like an MBA or something may come in. But what courses would you have liked to have seen that were not offered, that now, being out there reflecting back, you're like, that would have been a great course to have?
I think I would have liked to seen, at the time, I guess, our capstone. I just actually missed the capstone at our university. I would say at the 4,000 level course, I think there could have been an elective. It would have been probably harder to staff, I think, from the logistical side of the university. But I do wish there was like an intro to business 101 of the industry, where you actually do talk about tax IDs and you talk about writing a business plan. Like, no one, we had this idea that, put your dream restaurant together and dining, but there's like, you need to be able to hand me a business plan and then go to someone who's going to hand you money like that. Just that understanding the language is important. Those are the things I find take time. I'm currently right now researching how to do a HACCP plan from start to finish. And that's an undertaking. And I remember learning about HACCP in school, and it's still like, I don't expect never expect Johnson & Wales to really run me through we're going to create a whole HACCP plan for this thing. Like that you need experience. You need a lot of knowledge to get there.
They do teach that class now. I just finished it. Yeah, we have advanced food safety, HACCP, and special processes. So it's like, food safety. And the project in there is to write an actual HACCP plan and take it all the way through, even your prerequisites, going through those before you even start the plan and building the team. So we do it. It's a tough class. It's actually required in the culinary bachelor's, but it's a tough class because, as you know, as you're going through it now, it's dry and there's a lot of laws and a lot of rules.
I read the Chicago Food Code yesterday. I read 58 pages, line by line, sentence for sentence. You've got to want to read that. Like, you've got to want to be looking for that information. And then, it took me years to get to a point where I was like, all right, everything they're saying actually has a place in my memory bank. Like, I can say, I understand what this line means, why they're wording it this way from the health world, and it makes sense in my operational tempo. But it took me years to get to that point where I could understand that. And Johnson & Wales did a great job. Really, I think the most important part is documentation, being very rigid and disciplined, and temperature logs, being disciplined and just keeping everything organized. So that structure, that foundation is already set for me. Now I'm going to go back and keep putting building blocks. And that's something, and I'm glad you guys are doing it. That's huge. That gives someone a mental nugget to keep in their head that down the road probably will produce some sort of fruit form. If you're a young cook out of school, you're probably not going to be writing HACCP plans for your first year. If you're going to a place where ROP is there, I think that's where it's a real advantage, because you can have that conversation. You do understand the nitty-gritty of the process of those control points and why it's really, really, really important. It's a privilege to be able to have a HACCP plan in your restaurant. It's pretty much, in my opinion, it's a crown jewel. It's the epitome of your understanding of health and safety and your true responsibility to the customer. And you've thought about everything to make sure that they're safe and that your vision for food can be executed at a very high level. I think it's great.
Yeah, we teach the ROP, reduced oxygen packaging, the fermentation, the acidification, if they want to make yogurt, if they want to make sausages. So we go through all that. I don't know if it should be a required class, though. I mean, I think, like you were saying, there's missing an entrepreneurship class. Maybe there should be an elective for those that think, well, I guess you won't know if you want to go into HACCP down the road, but those that want to could take the class. But being a requirement, some paths that the students may take, they may not need that. But again, that's for the culinary bachelor's degree program.
Yeah, that does seem very specific, a little bit of a narrow window. Listen, if you're going to go through it, you will be better off for it. But I think there's, again, something that could have been more broad-based understanding that could have helped in the longer run. I'd rather learn I would have liked to have learned, basically how to write a business plan before I could write HACCP plan. Then I can know my dream to open a little sandwich shop is going to be more reasonable before I'm like, well, now I want to do curing, dry aging, all that.
Yeah, I think more electives would be good. We currently I teach two other ones that I think have been added since you've left. One is Introduction to Culinary Instruction. It's an elective for those that may want to go into teaching.
Great.
And the other one is Food Media Presentation Skills for the culinary student, for those that want to learn how to, do a blog, do a podcast, do a YouTube channel, be able to present, whether it's for TV. So we have that as an elective too, that people may want to go into that route. So I think more electives, it allows people to kind of pick their own unique, customized path would be the best.
That's huge. Yeah, those are great options. And I think it's very poignant to the market, because those are things you need to know. Being a chef 30 years ago is not being a chef now. Being a chef 40 years ago isn't even the same thing. And I think if you look at the top chefs in the world right now, what they have to be good at isn't really fair. And that's why it's probably really hard to hit that level. Is you got to be really, really, really smart in the business. You have to be absolutely the best cook in the kitchen, amongst the best cooks in the kitchen. And you have to have a great vision and creativity. And then you got to be somewhat of a decent leader and a manager. All of those things is not essentially what the original role of being a cook was, or being a chef. It's evolved so much more. If someone can do those things, your potential is limitless. There isn't anything in this industry you can't do if you're good at all of those founding pillars of excellence. But it's okay also if you're not super marketing savvy. Like I've got an Instagram. It's not for anybody but for me. And that's not really the best way to advertise my product. And that's okay. I know my deficiency in that world. I also understand that I spent more time focusing on how to make the money on the onion than I did how to post a picture on Instagram. So kind of some of those differences, I think, again, to the electives, you just got to determine the kind of person you want to lead in the industry and be for yourself.
Yeah, and then you just build a team. Whatever your weakness is, you just hire someone for that. Like you could hire a social media manager. You could hire someone that could take over those other parts that, you may be deficient in to kind of make you whole in that area.
Yeah.
And it's true what you say about school too, is I don't think a lot of people realize what a chef has to do, or what the hats they have to wear and the roles they have to play. Mm-hmm. I can remember when I was going for my terminal degree or PhD or my MBA, I was in class, and one was I got my degree in education, and I was in there with people that were maybe going to be principals and things like that, deans, and they were in the education world, and they say, "Oh, you teach cooking? You're a chef? Oh, that's fun. Do you guys get to wear those hats? And what do you flip burgers? What do you learn?" And I'm like, culinary school is a lot more than that. It's really a business degree plus a culinary degree plus a marketing. There's so many parts and components that go in to make that successful chef or food service entrepreneur that I don't think people realize it behind the scenes.
Oh, it's all encompassing. It's really difficult. But the other thing I would say is, just because you learned it in 4 years, just because you went through these classrooms, you're going to have to put 90% of that back on the shelf. Because if you're going to be in the industry as a cook, your number one job is to be the best cook you can possibly be. And I will definitely tell anybody, if you can be as good as Grant or Thomas Keller or Curtis Duffy, if you can do that in 4 years, that's great. Good for you. And you actually had a guest on who I thought was probably, to this day, still is the best cook I've seen in person, Luis Young. Listen, that kid had had everything different. He just was really, really, really good. It was an awe. And he's competing with the giants and the megaliths in the industry, and he still has to get better. And he would say that, right? Because he's still pushing himself to reach a new height. And I think that's the other thing is he invested so much of his time and energy, as I have, as great chefs do, is you invest back into the fundamentals. I mean, once you leave, the only thing you should be asking is, what do I not know fundamentally off the top of my head? Can I make a perfect hollandaise 1,000 times every day?
Yeah.
I put béarnaise on my menu for 2 reasons. One, it's delicious. And two, I now have something that if I bring a team member on, I can come back to a fundamental sauce and we can have a conversation about what that is and what are the principles and the aspects of what makes that work. So it's a teaching moment. So I've built already preemptively a teaching moment of just pure foundation already in the menu. And I think of it those ways because I just want to be technically sound on the base level. And the more I focused on that, the better any of those little gadget tricks have gotten me.
Yeah.
Those little things in your sleeves, those have become easier to execute because the basis is just really, really, it's secondhand. I got it. It's easy.
That's perfect. Yeah, béarnaise is one of my favorites, and it's a good fundamental sauce. Talking about Luis Young, very talented, and he was a guest on the first season of this show, and listeners can go back and listen to that if they like, but he really went into the sacrifices. I mean, he had to make, sleeping on the floor, working the numerous hours. So if anyone's, looking at that level, think about the sacrifices you have to make. And it was interesting too that he spent some time in front of the house, like you were just mentioning earlier. He says that really helped complete him, knowing both sides of that, the front and the back, and breaking down that wall between the two of them.
Yeah, again, at the chef level, at the man, and I guess I want to be specific, really specific here. When I'm referring to a chef, I'm referring to a manager or a leader of a team. If you're not, in my opinion, if you're not leading a team of a sous chef responsibility, you really haven't earned it. It's a title, right? You have to wear that responsibility. It's just because you can fly a plane doesn't mean you're the captain of the airplane. You're the first officer, right? One of those is a specific title. You're able to do a fundamental job, but one has a different responsibility. So when you're a chef, the thing you have to ask yourself is really two questions. One is, are you well-rounded? And second, how bad do you want it? And that sacrifice always comes back to the how bad do you want it? Are you willing to take pay cuts? Are you willing to work for less than you think your value is currently? Are you willing to work an extra shift? Are you willing to pick up an extra shift? Are you willing to work at a higher level kitchen at a lower level position? You've got to ask yourself, how much are you willing to, what are you willing to put in front as opposed to your granular vision of being successful? Success is something that will come to you. It will be a drawing force because you should be doing everything you can to build a rounded individual. You don't want to get hyper specific. And I think that's a key point young cooks need to understand sometimes is if you're going to do culinary school, great, do it. It's there to put a foundation, but you're entering a trade. It's one of the 3 oldest original jobs that we can understand in the trades like this, basically bricklaying, cooking, and another job. And we normally know the third one is. But to that point, it's that mindset. I've always found that person excels, putting the effort in. And I've been out of school for almost 10 years now, a little less than that. And I've just now gotten to the point where my experience is starting to match my education, right? So if you've got a 4-year degree and you've got 10 years in the industry, I kind of find that like the perfect sweet spot. Because you've seen enough, you've gone through enough things, you can have an honest conversation about what's happening. Experience is always the king. Education is the thing I felt in my world that when I get to the upper levels, when I get to that chef or sous chef, that's when my mind or my education works better in communication because I have something to draw on. You're drawing from that academic world as much as you're drawing from your experience. So it's principle and practice, and you're able to really collide them together and be a really good force. Mm-hmm. But you got to sacrifice that. I say it all the time, like I pretty much put my degree on a shelf. I don't hang my degree anywhere. I don't do any of that because I'd rather have my work and my experience be the token. When we talk about the degree, I'll tell you what's great about it. But I want my experience to be the first thing that leads me to the room. the degree should be now we can have a real dialogue about food costs. We can have a real dialogue about menu engineering. We can have a real dialogue about building a team. All of those things. That's where that I feel makes a bigger difference.
Yeah, that's true. And I've had other guests that say it takes about 10 years, to be that chef, sous chef, to get into that management role. And I agree, because it's almost like medical school. You got to go in and do your you do your learning, that's the school part, but then you got to go out and do your residency. You got to go out and practice and do different roles and apply those learning and get more experience. And then after a certain amount, then you can be like a doctor and open up your own practice. And now you're ready to lead and use that combination of experience and education.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned sacrifice, and Luis Young, when I had him on, he mentioned sacrifice too. Obviously had quite a bit. And he also brought up an interesting point. He talked about questioning himself, that he had along that way, those 10 years, he had self-doubts, whether that was the right path or did he make the right decisions. I'm wondering, did you find that as well through your 10 years after school?
Every day. Every day. Yeah, your dream should be so big and your belief in yourself should be so big that it scares you just a little bit. Because that fear is going to keep you aware, and hopefully you can channel that energy, at least I do, of saying, okay, I really want this. What is the actual best move? What is the thing I need to do to be that version of myself? I don't want to pretend to be a chef. I don't want to play. This is a life, and there are standards that the industry has and fellow chefs have. I have to gain respect for these people, for my colleagues. And you're my colleague. Every instructor now I've ever worked with is now a colleague, because we're in the same huge, huge fraternity that spans races and genders. It's a beautiful, beautiful world, but it's a respect-based world, and you got to put the effort in. And you really need to understand, like, do I belong here? The answer is yeah, you do. There's always a place for someone in this industry. That's what I love about this. There's a place for everybody. It really welcomes everybody. It's also really, really hard. Really, really hard. In those sacrifices, you're never going to go somewhere if you don't take a risk. And a risk means you're going to normally have a chance of failure, which there should be a little bit of apprehension there. But the potential, and if you go back to leaning into that trade mentality, that's where your head is at, you're going to be fine. Because there is also this kind of understanding of what that means, and you can go through some of those trials and tribulations.
Very good. Awesome. So I'd like to take you back and speak to your background regarding the military and, being a cadet and a cadet captain, and, tell us a little bit about that and how that had an effect on you, or if it did, making you the person you are today. And even before going into culinary school or into this career, did it have an impact or an impression on you?
Yeah, it's a lifelong impact. There's life lessons there I've never forgotten. I mean, I'll start at the top of the quote with communication is the greatest spirit of communication is no common core of experience. And that was drilled to me when I was 16. My story starts at 15 in 6th grade, middle school for me. And my friend that I had met at the time was in this program called the Air Force Auxiliary. And it was started in 1941. Essentially, it was a group of civilians who would fly these airplanes to defend the coast. And actually, it was the Atlantic coast for looking for U-boats. And it's really, really developed into something completely different. That core branch is aerospace education, cadet program, and emergency services. So essentially what CAP is a volunteer service of complete civilians who really conform themselves to military regulations. So we follow Air Force protocol, Air Force regulations. And I had done that as a cadet and a senior member for 9 years. I'd reached the grade of cadet captain. I was a cadet commander of a squadron of about 40 people. And that was by 17. So a lot of this leadership principles were something that were really big for me. So I knew I could be a leader of men and women. I could lead. I knew I had discipline to excel. ROTC was a great wake-up call. I say to this day, the most competitive environment I have ever been in my life. Everyone is smarter, faster across the board. Everyone is super, super competitive, not just with each other, but specifically competitive with themselves. And you have to be to kind of be that A-type personality. And when I decided to change to cooking as a passion, I still kind of had that fire. I had that, like, you need to be the best. It's all about, extreme ownership, internal, motivation. You're really going to lead yourself. You're really the only one who's going to get you across the finish line. Self-reliance was really big. And I think when I got into culinary school and I realized the deficit was so big, it was like, you need to own where you are at, and you need to find a way to you need to catch up as fast as possible. I was getting cooked around circles. I could not keep up with anybody. It wasn't really till the back end of my second year or when I came back from Germany. And then that's kind of when I got a little, air under my wings a little bit. But that structure, that experience, what it taught me right away is respect for the authority, respect for the chain of command, something I'm very, very big on. If I'm working with a GM and the structure is the GM's over me, I will support that person's role 100%. I will make sure the flow of communication is through that person, because that person can't be blindsided, and I need to know what my role is. If I'm the tip of the spear at restaurants, which I have been at one point in time, you have to understand how that also works and what your role is to the other leaders, the ownership, as well as your team members, the followers, and the responsibility there is for that. It's a lesson I already had, that I felt confident when the time came, or if there was an opportunity to be a chef, that I could lead at that level. And there's always going to be growing pains. Listen, if the leader's not making a mistake, he ain't trying, right? He ain't cheating, he ain't trying.
Yeah.
And kind of the same verbiage in the kitchen. If you ain't sandbagging a little bit during a busy service, are you really properly preparing or anticipating the demand? Mm-hmm. And I know there's a debate about that, but ultimately the guests don't care. The moment the guest sits down, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but the moment the guest sits down, that's when the clock in their head starts, and they're only worried about their table. They're not worried about anyone else's. So that kind of also has always helped me a little bit in the industry. But my experience in the military, to any extent, just allowed me to understand what my role is and where my place is, and to be able to have that sort of internal dialogue about ownership and responsibility. And I think that, for me, I felt like was an advantage over some people. It's just a little bit of maturation. Johnson Wales takes people from all demographics, age brackets. We were working with people who were ex-rocket scientists from NASA. I remember one of those kids that running around campus, and kids right out of high school from South America, from the Dominican Republic. I mean, it couldn't have been more diverse if we had tried to put a different movie set in there. It was crazy how great it was.
Yeah.
But again, the overall experience that I had walking into there says, I need to stay focused. I need to not get distracted, and I need to be aware of what's in front of me and what my role is. And I use those lessons every day in my kitchen.
Yeah, as a chef instructor, I noticed that the students that had a military background, seemed to assimilate a little bit quicker, because, culinary is very similar to the military in many ways, structure-wise. Escoffier and the brigade system and the hierarchy. We used to do the lineups in the morning, and they pressed uniforms and the cleanliness and sanitation. I think that all kind of bodes well for those that come out of the military in many ways.
Yeah, I loved ironing my uniforms. It was something I took great pride in. I made sure I had the best creases. I knew the tricks. I knew how to keep everything really clean.
Polish the shoes.
I did. I know how to have everything dialed in. I've allowed myself to relax a little bit, allow the priority to be something more important than just visual appearance. But I always have a clean jacket in my kitchen in case I need to go to the front or talk to a rep. And I believe in those kind of basic principles as well.
Okay, so now looking back, was culinary school worth it? What's the return on investment? And there's a lot of time, there's a lot of money that you spent, there's a lot of, sacrifices that you had to make. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The university I attended was just a little over $120,000 for 4 years.
Wow.
So if I'm paying basically, maybe it's $34,000, $35,000 a year, so it's probably closer to $140,000. My first sous chef job, my first job out of culinary school was a chef at basically a supper club in Wisconsin. I made $15 an hour, and I fought really hard to get that. My second job, I was making about that same. And then my first real sous chef job, I remember getting my offer letter, and I was making $30,000 my first time as a sous chef. And they were working me, really working me. And that goes back to the sacrifice. How bad do you want it? Are you willing to truly understand that as much as you might have a 4-year degree, it's about the experience. You got to go out there and you got to earn it. I make a little more than that these days, but it's taken 10 years to, have that base salary requirement. And I think some of those risk rewards is something you also have to understand. I worked with a banquet chef in Lowe's, Chicago, which is where I was before this, for a major hotel, 4.5 stars. Great. Love the company. And the banquet chef had never gone to culinary school. And we talked about that all the time about, he's got none of this debt over his head. And I do. And, how do I manage it as opposed to him? And it's just understanding that you can not do this and end up at the same place. Where I think the opportunity to improve is I think what I have an advantage of is when we start talking nuts and bolts about food costing and doing any of the back end stuff, that's where I find I excel, because it's really, really, really easy to understand, because we've had those serious foundational understandings. So if you go do the apprenticeship, you start off at TGI Fridays, for example. There's a ton of lessons to be learned there. Then you go to a little cafe or mom and pop shop, and then you maybe find a James Beard chef you really want to start learning your skills for. You get 10, 15 years down the road, you're an established sous chef, maybe a chef de cuisine. You've learned the hard way. There's a lot of those lessons. If you read Bourdain's book, I'm rereading it currently. He got his butt kicked up north, P-Town, and then he decided to go to CIA because he got embarrassed being a broiler cook. Like Alcalde, right? Yeah. They were making fun of him, and he came back with a vengeance. The culinary school just gave him a foundation to stand on, but even Bourdain had to keep pushing himself in the industry because no one really cares. Like, that's the joke, is like, well, the kid went to culinary school, no one cares. Well, actually, employers care. Other cooks don't care, because it's either you can cook or you can't cook, or you are going to be a great manager or not. It's when you get to the point where you're going to start using that degree, menu engineering, food cost, developing HACCP plans. All of those things really do matter. And you have to determine whether you're willing to, are you going to pay for it through your time, or are you going to pay for it through your pocket? And you can do both. And you should do both a little bit, I think. Maybe you take an online course. It could be from the Harvard School. It can be from Johnson & Wales. All these things make a difference. But listen, for a university, for a degree, it's expensive. Absolutely. There's a real cost attached to that. And you need to ask yourself if you're willing to live that life, if you're willing to accept the responsibility of all of that. It's something to consider, right? It's not just about learning. It's about a full picture of your life the moment you graduate. So,
yeah, you don't go to culinary school to be a line cook, right? I mean, it's not a hobby. It's a career, and it's a big, big investment. And if you want to get the return on that investment, all that money spent, you need to have a long-term plan and be successful. So how would you recommend people pay for it? I mean, is there loans? Is there, programs? Is there employer sponsors? I mean, how can you defer some of those costs?
Yeah, that's a great question. You got to find a way to diversify yourself. I know people who worked every day while they were in school, full-time job, full-time school. Couldn't believe it. Some people used a GI Bill. Great advantage for that. Some people were financed individually and could afford that. Me, I was in a position where I had saved a little bit of money from working. I was able to put down a couple $1,000s to start, and then I needed FAFSA grants. I needed Pell grants. And they came to the point where I had to go try to be an RA because I needed to find a way to cut the cost. And then after I was an RA for a year, I was really trying to be a TA because I wanted the scholarship. I wanted the opportunity, but I wanted the money. Because I needed to find a way to survive, because I wanted it that bad. I also wanted to learn and be a part of, the educational team from that aspect. I was really, really intrigued in the leading learning cycle that I had to immediately adapt. But my path to getting out of school was basically 3 years of some sort of service to the university in a supporting role. And I wouldn't have been able to get to the other side if I hadn't been a TA. I was really thinking about not coming back because I couldn't afford it. My family wasn't really able to support me as much as they wanted to. And I think that's most families. Everyone's in that boat for a lot of the cases. You got to decide if you want it. I mean, yeah, you can go cook, work for a hotel and say, hey, I'm interested in going to culinary school. You guys want to start paying for some of that? Well, we'll maybe pay 30, 40% and I'll pay the rest. There are those options out there. You got to look at all of them. Apply to grants, apply to scholarships, do whatever it takes if you're serious about it, because if you're spending that much money, and I've seen it, I've seen people who have these degrees and they just don't use them anymore. I feel bad for them. If they have to pay it off, you're paying for something that you weren't in love with. That hurts a little bit. If they can handle that, that's great, but that's their decision. For me, I love what I'm doing. It doesn't mean I love every day. It doesn't mean every day is easy. It means I'm just putting the effort in because I'm aware of how much it costs, and you got to give it a go. You got to compete.
And those are some good tips on how to maybe defer some of those costs. But for the listeners, maybe you could explain what is an RA and what is a TA and how that can help, foot some of that bill or reduce that cost.
Yeah, I was a resident assistant. So basically just kind of a student who kind of made sure the dorms were well kept after and everyone was kind of following the rules. Entry-level leadership. And I think there's all facets there. You're not babysitting, you're leading, and you're supporting the role of the university. For a TA, more specifically, I was in charge of courses, and sometimes courses I hadn't particularly finished. And the way I went about that is...
And that's teaching assistant.
That's teaching assistant. I actually developed my schedule upside down. So when I was a TA, I took as many 4,000 level courses as I could first. So I did my first beverage concentration course was enology. I skipped everything. I went right to enology with Peridot, and everyone in that classroom wanted to be a som. And that's the hardest course I've ever taken at Johnson & Wales, because everyone was really smart and there was no letting up. It's like, here's France. It's 170 pages. We're going to read it this week, and we're going to talk about France in 45 minutes. You need to figure everything else out. You're like, oh, man.
Wow.
But I was doing that because I needed to also provide some sort of base understanding for the students I was participating in. I might not be teaching wine, but I need to understand some base varietals or how to set up a tasting, which I've had to do multiple tastings. As a TA, I'm also watching students cook in a kitchen. So I was responsible for the condition and the outcome of that kitchen. At a secondary level, the instructor is the primary, but my job is to make sure that the instructor, if need not be there, can leave and do something because there needs to be supervision. So that role was really important for me to feel confident, at least for me, that I can learn something new and then immediately regurgitate it as well that matches the same lesson, right? And I think as a TA, your job is to support and supplement the educational role. What you learn is how to be a really good follower while being a really good leader at the same time.
Okay, so now have you achieved your goals since leaving Johnson & Wales, since leaving campus? Where's your goals? Where do you see yourself going? Where do you think you're at now?
One of my goals is to be a chef in Chicago, be an actual CDC or head chef in Chicago. I very recently have had the opportunity, even in this unfortunate situation, to find a new home to be able to do that. So I think I've really achieved one of my dreams, and it's been 10 years. I've taken a lot of risks to get here, and some were really risky and some were not so much. And I would say, yeah, I have. But the journey couldn't have imagined that the track I have taken to get here would be the actual track I've taken. And there's just something about that I find a little whimsical. I think it's fun. You got to kind of submit yourself to the path. The weight of the industry will kind of move you like a big wave, and you just got to kind of go with it a little bit. Yeah, I have. Johnson Wales has helped me. Culinary School has helped me. I needed that. I have no really cooking experience. I felt like I had a sharp mind and aptitude and potential, and they gave me the foundation. It worked for me. And it allowed me to reach a different dream I didn't know I had, until I was in my late teens. And it's not about achieving. It's one thing. I want to keep it. Now I can't go backwards. Now I got to redouble down my efforts somehow to achieve new heights, or to help not just build myself up, but it's about building this concept that I'm currently working with. And I'm with this great team and making that as good as it can be. And now I get to compete in a tier 1 market. I compete with chefs in Chicago, chefs in New York, chefs in Austin and LA and San Francisco. It's in Miami. I'm now in this another fraternity, right? It's like being in the O Club as an officer. Now it's a different level, and it's also a different level of responsibility. And it's about engaging at that level, and something I didn't think I would really get to as quickly. There was always a hope, a little ambitious, maybe a little too grandiose, but that's what dreams are for. And if you can find a way to make incremental, meaningful steps that help reestablish a foundation, you're going to do just fine doing that. And I think that's where I ended up doing. And I'm really proud of myself and excited to be here, but I'm excited to be able to finally do more, give back to my industry in a way that I wasn't able to use a platform and use a voice to allow others to be highlighted.
Good for you. That's great. Do you want to give a shout out to where you are now, what you're doing, in case somebody wanted to look you up?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working with Hops and Curds in Lincoln Park, Illinois. We're very excited. We're kind of more of a modern gastropub idea. We really take pretty much Midwest comfort food and we just elevate it a little bit. We find ways to be a little unique and a little counterculture because we don't take ourselves too seriously. The effort we put in is the serious part. The thought we put in is the serious part. Our honest, genuine approach is the serious part, but we take some things with a little playfulness, right? You got to have a little youth in the cooking. That's what makes it fun a little bit. A little bit of that grandma touch, as I always like to talk about. Great. Listen, if they're a great team there, I couldn't be more happy. Our potential is literally limitless. And I'm first and foremost just really fortunate to be a part of that because I also understand it's about 17 to 20% of restaurants are not open anymore. It's almost 500,000 people who are out of work in the industry, if not more, that cannot get a job back because their restaurant does not exist. So that's, as much as I feel, humbled in success, it's also a realization that we've got to use this platform to help our other peers, our other brothers and sisters out there. That's
great. And is there a website there that someone could look it up if they wanted to check out the place or the menu or something?
Absolutely. hopsandcurds.com. Just like you understand, it's like the hops like the beer and the curds like cheese curds. That's pretty straightforward for us. And my Instagram handle, if anyone's interested, is Rubenic, Rubenic, on Instagram. And you can also follow us at Hops and Curds on Instagram as well.
Awesome. I will definitely put those in the show notes too. So if someone's listening and driving and can't write that down, you can go back and find that and look those links up.
Excellent.
Well, Alex, as we come to the end of our talk today, and before I wrap this up, is there any last minute guidance or any advice that you want to leave with the listeners, something you want to share?
Yeah, I think, something that's always kind of resonated with me is trying to find a mentorship or some level of, camaraderie that you can always communicate to. This is a really tough road, front of house, back of house. You need someone to kind of be a sounding wall to help provide you with some different insight, different perspective. It's whether it's a chef instructor, whether it's a fellow line cook or a chef or a sous chef or an owner. Ask questions. Ask all of the questions. Be relentless in your pursuit of your own dream and the pursuit of being the best version of yourself as you can be, not just for the industry, but specifically for you. Do that. And you could do that day one of culinary school. And you can do that if you're 20 years out. It's the same idea. You're just committed to your own growth and your own success. And listen, if you're bettering yourself every day, what's really happening is you're making the team better. And it's about that teamwork. And that's one of the most important parts to keep in mind is that you're a part of something much bigger, really, in reality. So find that mentor, find that partner, find someone you can talk to, keep that dialogue open, keep it constant. Ask questions, be fearless.
Well said. And that is something I hear with all the guests on here. They're always talking about mentorship and offering themselves, because I think that's the hospitality in all of us that, if they can ever help. And I always tell my students too that if I can ever be a resource for them anywhere in their career along their journey, I'm always here. And I think that's so true for everybody in this industry. We're always willing to help and give advice and give whatever we can.
Yeah, I mean, I currently mentor a fellow JWU alum from our campus right now. I've been in contact with this individual for 3 years, and it's something we work on every week. We have the same day we meet. We talk about this individual's goals and how we can achieve those together. I'll extend it to really anyone listening here. If they're a young cook and you got questions, do not hesitate to get in contact. The more questions you ask to anybody is the better. You hit it on the head. It's our hospitality. That needs to be the vibrating light in the inside, the thing that you do care about. That's the gift, right? You can't teach someone to care. Either they do or they don't. And I think that's what makes us unique. As much as we have hard days and bad clopins, you always come back saying, I could make someone's day today, though. And that's pretty special.
That's true. And I'll piggyback onto that. If anyone is listening and needs advice or wants a follow-up, reach out to any of the guests that have been on this show. I think every one of them, you go in their show notes, there's their bios, there's their social media contacts. Reach out to them, or anybody, myself or anyone at a school or any restaurant. If you talk to a chef or a manager in this business, I know they would help you in the long run. Write them an email. I'm sure they'll answer you.
Absolutely.
Well, that is just about all the time we have for this episode. I want to first thank you, Alex, for coming on the show today and sharing your culinary school story with all of us. We really appreciate your time, your insight, and your honesty.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoy this. This is the stuff that gets me excited every day to be able to share and talk about our industry. It's really a blessing. So thank you so much, Chef.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great catching up. Thanks again. I enjoyed our chat. Bye-bye now.
Have a good one.
And a big thanks and appreciation also goes out to all of you, the listeners. We hope you enjoy the show and this episode. You all are a big part of this show, so please let us know what you think. Your comments are always welcome, and they help us in making the best show possible. You can email them to culinaryschoolstories@gmail.com. That's culinaryschoolstories@gmail.com. Or even leave us a voicemail at area code 207-835-1275. That's area code 207-835-1275. And if you like the show, we have a big ask of all of you, and that is to share the podcast with everyone you know and to give us a positive rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Okay, until our next Culinary School Story, take care and be well. Bye-bye. Culinary School Stories is a proud member of the Food Media Network.